"Mommy, can I have the blue crayon?" Emily whispered, tugging gently at my sleeve. I smiled, reaching into my purse for our restaurant activity kit, a special collection of quiet toys and coloring supplies I always carried to keep my kids entertained during family dinners. My name is Olivia, and at 35, I've mastered the art of dining out with 3 well-behaved children. Emily, 7, was carefully coloring her kids' menu, while Max, 5, was solving a puzzle book. Even little Sophie, 3, was quietly arranging her stuffed animals on her booster seat. That's why my sister-in-law Amanda's shrill voice caught me completely off guard. "Oh my God, not the crayons again. This is Bella Luna, not some chain restaurant." She rolled her eyes dramatically, adjusting her designer dress. "Can't you control your children for one evening?" I took a deep breath, maintaining my composure. "They're being perfectly quiet, Amanda. They're just coloring while we wait for our food." My mother-in-law, Margaret, chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. "Darling, when Amanda was young, she knew how to behave in upscale establishments. Perhaps if you spent more time teaching manners instead of whatever this is." She gestured dismissively at our activity kit. I felt my cheeks flush but kept my voice steady. "My children are well behaved. They're not disturbing anyone." The truth was, this dinner was already tense before we even arrived. It was supposed to be a celebration of my father-in-law's retirement, but like every family gathering since I'd lost James 2 years ago, it felt more like an endurance test. My late husband's family had always been particular, but without him here to run interference, their judgment had become increasingly harsh. "Well," Amanda sniffed, checking her reflection in her phone camera, "when Thomas and I have children, they'll know better than to turn fine dining into a daycare center." Just then, Sophie accidentally knocked over her water glass. It didn't spill on anyone, just a small puddle on our own table, but Amanda leaped up as if she'd been scalded. "That's it," she screeched, drawing attention from nearby tables. "I can't take this anymore. You and your unruly children need to leave. Now." Emily's lower lip trembled as she carefully put down her crayon. Max clutched his puzzle book to his chest, and Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "Amanda, lower your voice," I said firmly, reaching for napkins to clean up the small spill. "You're the only one causing a scene." "No, Amanda's right," Margaret declared, lifting her chin. "This is a high-class establishment, not some playground. James will be mortified to see how you've let things slide since." She paused, her implication clear. "Since he died." My father-in-law, Gerald, sat silently, staring at his menu, while Thomas, Amanda's husband, suddenly became very interested in his phone. Neither man was willing to stand up to their wives, even for their grandchildren, niece, and nephews. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "We'll leave, but not because we've done anything wrong. We'll leave because I won't subject my children to this kind of treatment." As I helped Sophie out of her booster seat, I saw a familiar figure approaching our table. Marco Salvatore, the restaurant's owner, was walking toward us with purpose in his stride. I'd never spoken to him directly, but everyone in town knew his face. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his Italian accent warm, but his eyes serious. Amanda straightened up, adopting her most charming smile. "Oh, Mr. Salvatore, we're so sorry for any disruption. We were just explaining to my sister-in-law that this isn't really an appropriate place for small children." Marco's expression shifted as he looked at my kids, then back at Amanda. "Not appropriate? That's interesting, considering these children have been here many times before." Margaret's perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up. "That's impossible. We're regulars here, and we've never seen them." "No," Marco agreed, "you wouldn't have. They usually come for lunch with their father." He turned to me, his eyes softening. "You must be Olivia. James spoke of you often." The mention of my husband's name made my heart catch. You knew James?" Marco nodded, pulling up a chair to join our table uninvited. "Knew him? Signora, your husband saved this restaurant. 10 years ago, when the bank was ready to foreclose, James structured a deal that kept us afloat. He believed in our vision when no one else would. He never wanted recognition, said the food was all that mattered. He smiled at my children. He used to bring Emily here when she was just a baby, said the smell of our bread reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. James had never mentioned this. It wasn't his way to brag about helping others, but it was exactly the kind of thing he would do. Marco continued, his voice carrying clearly to nearby tables. These children will always belong here. Their father helped ensure this place would exist for them to enjoy. He turned to Amanda and Margaret, his expression cooling significantly. Perhaps it is those who judge children for their natural joy who do not understand the true spirit of Italian dining. In my country, family is everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda's face had turned an interesting shade of red, while Margaret seemed to be having trouble maintaining her usual superior expression. Marco turned back to us, smiling warmly. Now I believe it's time for the special dessert course. Emily, would you like to help me in the kitchen? Your father told me you love to bake. Emily's face lit up as she looked at me for permission. I nodded, watching as Marco took her small hand and led her toward the kitchen, Max and Sophie following excitedly behind. Left at the table with my in-laws, I felt a strange sense of peace. You know, I said quietly, James always said this place felt like home. Now I understand why. The atmosphere at our table shifted dramatically after Marco's revelation. Amanda sat in stony silence, aggressively stabbing at her pasta, while Margaret seemed to have lost her appetite entirely. My father-in-law, Gerald, however, had tears in his eyes. I remember when this place was just a hole in the wall, he said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. James used to bring takeout from here every Sunday when he was working late on their refinancing deal. He said the owner reminded him of his grandfather. It was the most Gerald had spoken about James since the funeral. Just then, my children returned from the kitchen, their faces glowing with excitement and dusted with a bit of flour. Mommy, Max exclaimed, trying to keep his voice at what he called his inside level despite his enthusiasm. Mr. Marco showed us how to make cannoli, and he has pictures of Daddy on his wall. Sophie nodded vigorously, clutching a small paper bag. He gave us cookies, special ones. Emily, ever observant at 7, looked between the adults at the table before adding quietly, There's a plaque in the kitchen with Daddy's name on it. Mr. Marco says he was a hero. I watched as Margaret's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. She'd spent 2 years trying to dictate how we should remember James, how we should behave, how we should grieve. But here, in this restaurant she'd had tried to make us leave, was a piece of him we'd never known about. Marco returned to our table, carrying a tray of desserts that hadn't been on the menu. These were James's favorites, he said, setting them down. He would order them every time he came in for our Friday lunch meetings. Friday lunches? I asked, surprised. But he always said he had client meetings on Fridays. Marco smiled knowingly. He did. But he also made time to help me with the books, teach me about business loans, show me how to make the restaurant more profitable. He said everyone deserves a chance to build something lasting for their family. He looked pointedly at Amanda and Margaret. All families. Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I didn't know James was involved with this place. There's a lot you didn't know about my son, Gerald said suddenly, his voice stronger now. He didn't just work at the bank, Amanda. He built relationships. He helped people. He turned to me, his eyes wet. Olivia, I'm sorry. We've been so wrapped up in maintaining appearances, we forgot what James really valued. Margaret started to say something, but Gerald held up his hand, silencing her for perhaps the first time in their marriage. No, Margaret, enough. Look at these children, our grandchildren. They're not being disruptive. They're being curious, engaged just like their father was. Marco nodded approvingly before being called away to another table. As he left, a young waitress approached with a small, leather-bound book. Mrs. Harrison, she said, addressing me. Mr. Salvatore wanted you to have this. It's a collection of recipes your husband helped save when we digitize our systems. He wrote notes in the margins. I opened the book with trembling hands. There, in James's familiar scrawl, were little notes about each dish. Emily would love the chocolate in this, said one. Need to bring Max here when he's old enough to appreciate the tiramisu, said another. The last entry was dated just a week before the accident, Sophie's first birthday coming up. Maybe Marco will help me plan something special. He never got to, I started, my voice catching. But we can, Emily said firmly, sounding so much like her father it made my heart ache. Mr. Marco said we can come back anytime. They'll teach us all Daddy's favorite recipes. Thomas, who had been quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke up. Amanda, he said softly, I think we owe Olivia and the kids an apology. Amanda looked like she'd bitten into something sour, but before she could respond, something remarkable happened. Sophie, my youngest, walked over and placed her paper bag of cookies on Amanda's plate. Daddy always said sharing makes things better, she said with the simple wisdom of a 3-year-old. You can have my cookies, Auntie Amanda. The gesture seemed to deflate whatever argument Amanda had been building. She looked at the small bag, then at Sophie's earnest face, and something in her perfectly maintained facade crumbled. I'm sorry, she whispered, then louder, I'm sorry, Olivia. I've been awful. James would be so disappointed in how I've treated his family. Margaret still sat rigid in her chair, but I could see her fingers trembling as she reached for her water glass. The carefully constructed world she'd built, where appearances mattered more than feelings and propriety trumped family, was cracking at the foundations. Maybe, I said, choosing my words carefully, we could make this a new tradition. Friday family dinners here, in James's honor. The children could learn about their father's legacy, and we could all remember him the way he'd want to be remembered, bringing family together over good food. Gerald was the first to respond. I think that's a wonderful idea. He looked at his wife and daughter. What do you say? Ready to learn what this place meant to James. 1 year later, I sat at our regular Friday table at Bella Luna, watching Emily help Marco knead dough in the open kitchen. Max was carefully setting the table, with Sophie trailing behind him, placing the special children's menus James had apparently helped design years ago. The changes in our family over the past year had been remarkable. Margaret, who had once insisted on formal dress codes and perfect manners, now wore an apron covered in flour as she learned traditional Italian cooking alongside her grandchildren. Her perfectly manicured nails were often dusted with ingredients, and she seemed younger, somehow lighter. Olivia, she called from the kitchen doorway, come taste this sauce. I think I finally got James' recipe right. It still surprised me sometimes, this new version of my mother-in-law. After that first revealing night, she had thrown herself into learning everything about James's connection to Bella Luna. Each discovered detail seemed to crack her rigid exterior a little more, until the real person underneath began to emerge. Amanda had changed too. Her designer dresses were still present at our family dinners, but now they were often protected by one of Marco's spare aprons as she learned the art of pasta making. Her pregnancy announcement 3 months ago had come with a humble request. She wanted her child to grow up knowing this side of their Uncle James. The sauce is perfect, I told Margaret, tasting the spoonful she offered. Just like James used to describe it. Gerald appeared with Marco, both carrying old photographs they had discovered in the restaurant's archives. Look what we found, Gerald said excitedly. James's first meeting here, when he was just starting at the bank. Marco kept everything. The photo showed a younger James, his tie loosened, sitting at what was now our regular table with a much younger Marco. They were both laughing at something, plates of food scattered between stacks of papers. He saw something special here, Marco said, his accent still strong but his English much improved after a year of teaching cooking classes to our family. Not just good food but heart. Family, he understood that's what makes a restaurant truly great. Sophie climbed into my lap, her small fingers tracing the image of her father's face. Daddy's laughing, she said simply. He was always laughing here, Marco confirmed. Even during the hard times, when we were close to losing everything, he would say, Marco, as long as there's good food and family, there's hope. Thomas walked in then, carrying a large gift-wrapped package. Found it, he announced. The sign company finally finished it. We gathered around as he unwrapped the present, a beautifully hand-carved wooden sign that would hang in the restaurant's entrance. It read, In memory of James Harrison, who believed in good food, strong coffee, and the power of family. His legacy lives on in every meal shared here. It's perfect, I whispered, feeling the familiar mix of joy and sadness that came with these discoveries about James. Marco beamed with pride. Now everyone who comes here will know his story. And speaking of stories, he waved to his daughter, Maria, who brought out a leather-bound book we had all grown familiar with over the past year. It was our family recipe book, started with James' original notes but now filled with our own additions. Emily's first successful batch of marinara sauce. Max's creative pizza toppings that had actually turned out delicious, Sophie's special way of arranging the antipasto platter. Even Amanda had contributed, combining her flair for presentation with traditional recipes. Time to add another one, Marco announced. Margaret's perfected sauce recipe deserves a page. As we gathered around the book, I couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. A year ago, this family had been fractured by grief and rigid expectations. Now, here we were, flower-dusted and laughing, united by James's hidden legacy. You know, Gerald said, putting his arm around Margaret, James would love this. Not just the cooking and the food, but this, all of us together, making new memories while honoring the old ones. Margaret wiped a tear with the corner of her apron. He always knew better than us, didn't he? About what really matters. I looked around at our transformed family, Emily proudly showing Marco her perfected dough kneading technique, Max and Sophie decorating cookies with Amanda, Thomas photographing every moment. The formal dinners and stiff conversations had been replaced by something real, something warm. To James, Marco said, raising a glass of wine, who gave us more than just financial advice. He gave us the recipe for bringing family together. We all raised our glasses, even the children with their special juice cups, and I felt James's presence stronger than ever. Not in the formal family portraits Margaret used to insist on, or in the rigid rules of behavior Amanda used to enforce, but in the laughter, the messy aprons, the imperfect but love-filled attempts at recreating his favorite dishes. This was his true legacy, not just saving a restaurant, but creating a place where his children would always belong, where his family would learn to break bread and barriers together, where love mattered more than appearances. And as I watched Sophie attempt to teach Margaret the proper way to twirl spaghetti, like Daddy showed me in heaven, Nana, I knew that sometimes the most precious gifts are discovered in the most unexpected moments, even when they start with someone trying to throw you out of a restaurant.